Hi, Movies Recap here. Today I'll walk you through a sci-fi romance film called Bliss. Spoilers ahead, so be cautious and stay safe. The story begins at an IT company where Greg Whittle, a floor manager, seems lost in his own thoughts. He spends his time sketching scenes of a mesmerizing place he believes exists only in his imagination. The illustrations are vivid and detailed, as if he can see the place clearly in his mind. Moments later, Greg receives a call from his daughter, Emily, who invites him to her graduation ceremony happening over the weekend. Although Greg hesitates at first, as he has other commitments, he eventually promises to attend her big day. After the call ends, he resumes his sketching as if nothing else matters. His constant habit of zoning out at work has been creating difficulties for his colleagues. This leads to a meeting in the CEO Bjorn's office, where Greg is promptly fired. The news leaves him shocked, but instead of reacting, he drifts back into his dreamy state. Seeing his odd behavior, Bjorn approaches him with concern. But at that moment, Greg suddenly stands up abruptly, startling Bjorn. Bjorn stumbles backward and accidentally hits his head on the desk's edge. Snapping out of his daze, Greg checks on his boss, only to realize Bjorn is lifeless. Panicking, Greg fears being accused of murder, so he frantically looks for a solution. To cover up the incident, he props Bjorn's body by the window, hanging his sleeves to make him appear alive. Then he hides the rest of the body behind the curtain. Pretending everything is fine, Greg leaves the office, saying he's going to grab some lunch. He heads to a nearby bar and orders a double whiskey shot, trying to calm his nerves. While waiting for his drink, he notices a woman sitting nearby, observing him with unusual curiosity. The woman waves her hand several times, and suddenly, the sounds in the bar become muted for a moment. Greg notices this strange act, and the woman approaches him, calling him a real person. She introduces herself as Isabel and invites him to join her at her booth. Still confused, Greg sits down at her table. Isabel points out that Bjorn's body is visible from the bar, adding to his panic. She offers to help with his problem, claiming she feels partially responsible for everything that's happened. However, there's a catch. She asks Greg to retrieve a yellow amulet from her ex-boyfriend, who, like Greg, is immune to her powers. Greg listens quietly, but he has no idea what Isabel is talking about. To clarify, she explains that most of the people they see around them aren't real. According to Isabel, they're all part of a simulation she created. Although Greg is skeptical, he decides to go along with her plan. He finds Isabel's ex-boyfriend in the bathroom, passed out from drinking. In the man's hand is the yellow amulet, which Isabel claims contains special crystals capable of altering this fabricated world. Greg carefully retrieves the amulet and gives it to Isabel. Satisfied that he's done his part, Isabel promises to resolve his problem. She grabs his hand, closes her eyes, and suddenly the sunlight outside grows more intense. In that moment, Bjorn's body slips from the office window and crashes onto the pavement below. Shocked, Greg runs out of the bar to check the scene. His co-workers, who witnessed the fall, assume that Bjorn committed suicide. Afterward, Isabel sells Greg's phone and leads him to a homeless encampment near a bridge. She insists that he stay there until the situation with Bjorn blows over. Greg, however, wants to return home, but all his belongings, his money, keys, and ID, were left behind in the office. Greg explains that he has been staying at a motel since his recent divorce. Isabel advises him to return to his life once things calm down. That evening, Greg reflects on how Bjorn was a good person who didn't deserve to die. Isabel sympathizes with his emotions, but reiterates that Bjorn wasn't a real person. To prove her point, she hands Greg a lighter and asks him to light a set of candles placed a few feet away. Feeling unsure, Greg takes the lighter, focuses on the task, and imagines the candles lighting up. To his amazement, the candles ignite one by one without him moving closer. This act seemingly confirms Isabel's claim. This world is a simulation, and they are real people capable of manipulating it. Alternatively, this entire movie could be a metaphor for substance addiction. Later, during dinner, Greg shares his sketches with Isabel and mentions how effortlessly the details come to him. All of the drawings feature a woman holding a cigarette who looks exactly like Isabel. She reveals that his sketches are glimpses of their actual lives outside this fabricated reality. The next day, Greg's daughter, Emily, visits her brother Arthur. She tells him about inviting their father to her graduation, but Arthur dismisses the idea, expressing frustration over Greg's history of being an absent father. Meanwhile, Greg spends the day with Isabel, who decides to share the yellow crystals with him. The two go to a local ice rink where they have an incredible time skating together and even sneaking away to kiss in the bathroom. They also use their telekinetic powers to get back at inappropriate men. It becomes evident that Greg no longer feels guilt over Bjorn's death. Later, as they walk toward a fast food restaurant, Isabel spots a car parked nearby. Inside is a man clearly seeking women for transactional purposes. While Isabel approaches the man, Greg heads into the restaurant to grab their meal. Realizing he doesn't have enough money to pay for the food, Greg steps outside to look for Isabel. To his surprise, he sees her getting into the car and driving away. Feeling dejected, Greg leaves the restaurant, unaware that his son Arthur is sitting nearby. Greg waits for several hours outside the restaurant, hoping for Isabel's return. The cashier, feeling sorry for him, gives him a bag of stale food. When Isabel finally comes back, Greg shares the food with her without asking any questions. Later that night, Isabel leaves Greg standing on the street and heads into a shady apartment building. There, she confronts her ex-boyfriend Kendo and demands that he return the amulet with the yellow crystals. Meanwhile, Emily finds her father and tearfully pleads with him to come with her. Greg, however, insists on waiting for his friend and promises Emily he will attend her graduation. To his shock, Emily reveals that the ceremony took place 2 weeks ago. Disheartened by her father's confusion, she leaves him her phone number written on the back of her graduation photo. Moments later, Isabel, who had been watching Greg and Emily from a distance, returns. She urges Greg to forget about Emily, claiming she isn't a real human. Furious at Isabel's indifference, Greg argues with her. As their argument heats up, a suspicious van pulls up beside them. A man steps out, pointing a gun at them and demanding money. Filled with rage, Greg takes a few yellow crystals from Isabel's amulet and uses his telekinetic powers to crush the van. Although successful, the effort drains him and he collapses, vomiting from the intense strain. The next morning, Greg wakes up in Isabel's tent but finds she is nowhere to be seen. Spotting his sketches hanging nearby, he quickly gathers them and heads out for a walk. Greg arrives at a payphone and uses the number Emily gave him to try and call her. When she doesn't answer, he leaves a message on her voicemail, expressing his regret. Returning to the tent, Greg is met by an angry Isabel, who scolds him for leaving her without notice. It turns out that someone stole all the yellow crystals while Greg and Isabel were away. When Isabel notices that Greg also took his drawings with him, she becomes suspicious, accusing him of planning to leave her. Her suspicions deepen when she discovers Emily's photo tucked away in his pocket. Frustrated, Isabel insists once again that the world they are in isn't real and warns Greg that he's being pulled back into the illusion. Determined to convince him, she produces a test tube filled with blue crystals. These, she explains, are specifically designed to eject them from the simulation and return them to the real world. However, they need 10 crystals each, but they're short by 4. Despite the shortage, Isabel grows desperate, fearing that Greg is losing touch with the truth. Without hesitation, she grinds the crystals they have and hands the mixture to Greg, instructing him to inhale it through his nose. Although hesitant, Greg complies. Moments later, he wakes up in a lab with a tube attached to his nose, connected to a machine called the brain box. Beside him, Isabel is also waking up, similarly connected to the machine. A technician monitoring their session addresses Isabel as doctor. Clemens and asks if everything is all right. Isabel explains that Greg had become too attached to a fake person in the simulation, so she made the decision to eject both of them. The technician then approaches Greg, addressing him as Dr. Whittle, and removes him from the brain box. When they step outside, Greg is astonished to find himself in a large, serene research facility. 2 scientists approach them, asking if their program is facing any issues. Isabel reassures them that everything is fine before leading Greg away. As they walk through the town, Greg questions why he has no memory of this place. Isabel explains that memory loss is a common side effect of spending too much time in the brain box. To help him recall, she takes him to a picturesque location by the sea, a scene identical to the one in his sketches. As Greg takes in the breathtaking view, he begins to understand that this is their real home. In the afternoon, Greg asks Isabel if the world has always been this flawless. She explains that it wasn't always this way. It was once plagued by pollution and poverty. However, everything changed with the advent of automation, synthetic biology, and asteroid mining. To help trigger Greg's memory, Isabel retrieves a device called the thought visualizer, a groundbreaking invention that Greg himself created. The device transforms a user's thoughts and words into live animations. Using it, Isabel narrates how synthetic biology solved environmental crises, while asteroid mining rejuvenated the economy. Wealth was redistributed, and robots were designed to handle menial tasks. With money and time no longer being an issue, people pursued their passions freely. But eventually, this utopia led to humans feeling purposeless and detached. Over time, they became so accustomed to their perfect lives that they failed to appreciate the marvels surrounding them. This, Isabel explains, was the reason she created the brain box. By immersing people in simulated imperfect worlds, they could once again recognize and cherish the beauty of their reality. That evening, Greg and Isabel attend a grand gathering of celebrated scientists and artists. Among the guests is the renowned Dr. Nye, who congratulates Greg on his work with the thought visualizer. Later, Dr. Nye pulls Greg aside for a private conversation, expressing his concerns about the brain box project. However, their discussion is cut short as Dr. Nye abruptly excuses himself to attend another engagement. When Isabel notices their secretive exchange, she questions Greg about what they discussed. It's clear she is aware of the skepticism surrounding her project, and the subject visibly angers her. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to anyone, Emily's apparition has entered the gathering, searching for her father. Later that week, Isabel takes center stage at a public event to speak about the brain box. During her presentation, she invites Greg onto the stage, explaining to the audience that Greg had answered a series of questions before entering the simulation. Now she plans to ask him the same questions again to compare his current answers to the previous ones. She starts firing a series of questions, and Greg's responses clearly highlight his transformed view of their reality. Previously, he was restless and uninterested, but now, after experiencing the simulation, he feels deeply thankful and joyful. The presentation goes smoothly, and Isabel garners significant attention following her speech. However, as a group of admirers surrounds her, Greg is drawn away from the event by the sudden appearance of Emily. While pursuing her, something unusual starts to occur. The spotless venue gradually becomes filled with graffiti and trash. Meanwhile, Emily finally confronts Greg, asserting that she's his daughter and that he's not thinking straight. Emily reveals she found him in a homeless tent, clutching strange yellow crystals in his hand. She returns the crystals and insists he must decide which reality he prefers, either the perfect world or the broken one where his children exist. Suddenly, Greg hears Isabel calling for help and rushes downstairs to find the party in disarray. He grabs a yellow crystal and uses telekinetic powers to push back the crowd, saving Isabel from harm. Greg pulls her out of the chaos, and they observe the simulated world from the brain box, blending with their idyllic reality. Confused, Greg asks what's going on, and Isabel explains that leaving the brain box without enough blue crystals could be the cause. She tells him they need to re-enter the simulation to collect the correct amount of blue crystals once again. Shortly after, they return to the lab and reconnect themselves to the machine. They soon awaken back in the simulation, inside the homeless tent. Without wasting time, they head straight to Kendo's building, knowing he's the only one capable of creating the blue crystals. Once they arrive, Isabel picks up a nearby pistol and threatens Kendo to hand over as many blue crystals as he can provide. On edge, Isabel reacts when Kendo reaches for his pocket, shooting him without hesitation. She retrieves a packet of blue crystals from his back pocket and makes her way back to the tent with Greg. Unfortunately, the sound of the gunshot alerts nearby policemen, who begin entering the building. Greg and Isabel quickly race to the rooftop and climb down the fire escape. Once outside, they escape in a stolen car and head back to their tent, but their situation worsens as they realize they still don't have enough blue crystals. The police soon track them down, forcing the pair to take cover. With an insufficient amount of crystals, only one of them can wake up to the real world, leaving the other behind. Greg proposes that she kill him, believing it will automatically wake him up in reality, but Isabel is unsure if that will work. Isabel breaks down in tears, feeling guilty for creating the simulated world they are now trapped in. Greg comforts her by reminding her of the wonderful moments they shared in this world, expressing his love for its unpredictability. Ultimately, he decides to stay behind and urges her to return to the real world as soon as possible. Heartbroken, Isabel reluctantly agrees to his choice. After saying their goodbyes, Isabel turns herself into the police, giving Greg enough time to escape. As the police surround her, she activates the device and wakes up in her real world. In the aftermath, Greg realizes he is now permanently stuck in the simulation. He seeks help at a rehab clinic and joins a support group where he shares stories about his family and his life. The movie concludes with him reuniting with his daughter Emily, who is overjoyed to see him again. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.